Welcome to Key 1, Responsibility of Volunteer Engagement. This first key is great for people at numerous levels of your organization. From board members to senior leaders to volunteer managers, this is for anyone who has a role to play in creating policies and procedures and recruiting and retaining volunteers. We will also examine the value of police information checks. Before we dive into the meat of Key 1, we want to give you an overview. We will explain how you can set up your organization for success when it comes to volunteer screening. We will identify the players involved. We will discuss police information checks and the different types of checks you can request. But keep in mind that these checks are not meant to replace other volunteer screening steps. We will also explain the limitations and benefits police checks can have on screening your volunteers, and more. While you listen to this video, please remember that we are not lawyers. This video is not intended to offer legal advice. Our hope is that you will use the content from our video to inform your work and spark further conversation with your board, leadership, colleagues, and stakeholders. Also remember that every organization is different. Find the process that works best for you. Now, let's talk policies. When it comes to creating policies, everyone is involved. Board members, volunteer managers, senior staff members, clients, and even your volunteers. Your organization needs policies for your operations. Consider the policies around volunteers and their roles within your organization. These policies will help protect your clients, staff, organization, and your volunteers. We have a policy workbook you can download from our sidebar after this video. What are some of the responsibilities of the board in your organization? Think about what role they could play in volunteer engagement and screening within your organization. Volunteer managers understand daily operations inside and out. They are also the ones who engage with your organization's volunteers and clients. So, what role do you think your volunteer managers would play in your organization in relation to engaging and screening volunteers effectively? When you use the right policies and procedures, recruitment and retention of great volunteers will be easier for your entire organization. So who needs to be involved in engaging volunteers, and what roles do they play? Everyone in your organization has a role in the screening process. If you require volunteers to run your programs and services, then every level of your organization should play a part in engaging volunteers. Your board members' involvement in the screening process may focus on creating policies and procedures. Boards are responsible for risk management and understanding liabilities for the organization. Therefore, the policies and processes must take into account the risk and liability your organization may hold. The key words on the side of the screen represent the areas the board should be focusing on. Your board also needs to understand duty of care. This refers to organizations' obligation to take reasonable measures to care for and protect staff, participants, and volunteers. The download icon on this slide indicates that you can access important terms and definitions from our sidebar after this video. Now, let's take a look at volunteer managers. Because they work so closely with volunteers, volunteer managers can inform policies based on their experience. They really are in the best position to develop, implement, and adapt volunteer recruiting procedures. This includes creating role descriptions that reflect the volunteer policies. A volunteer manager's main focus is to engage volunteers. Because of this, they will look for ways to recruit and retain the best volunteers for your organization. Finally, volunteers. It's a good idea to consult your current and past volunteers to find out what they think about your current screening process and the role they have within your organization. Think about the volunteers in your community. Do they want to be a part of your community and your organization's success? Yes. Many volunteers are altruistic. They want to give their time, skills, and talents to your organization. You know that your volunteers are passionate about your organization, your cause, your mission. And by being in a volunteer role, they can give you insight on what's working, what isn't working, and how things can be improved or updated. Encourage their feedback and then value what they give you. Volunteers are crucial to your organization's success. Now that you have a better understanding of who is involved in the screening process, let's move on to volunteer position descriptions. A great position description for volunteer roles will draw in great volunteers. By clearly defining what is expected of the volunteer, your organization will benefit by beginning to understand what some of the risks could be regarding that specific role. You can't always create a position description without policies, but when you can, the position description can sometimes help inform your policies. Take a second and consider the type of person who would be a great fit for your position. Try to think of some of the skills you may require from your volunteer for your role. Get to know your volunteers and put them first. This will keep them coming back. Stay tuned for the second key, and we will share more with you about volunteer position descriptions. Are you part of an organization that serves vulnerable populations? Will any of your volunteers be in a position of trust and authority with clients? If you're thinking yes to these questions, then you may require a police information check or a vulnerable sector check. But how do you determine if a volunteer or staff member is in a position of trust and authority? If their work with vulnerable persons includes the following, then they are in that position. Decision-making power. This could be a participant helping someone with a developmental disability book a medical appointment. Unsupervised access. If a participant will be responsible for driving an individual to an appointment. Closeness inherent in the relationship. This could be a big brother, big sister relationship. Or conduct tasks that are personal in nature, which could include helping someone to the washroom. We have mentioned vulnerable person numerous times now, but what is the definition of a vulnerable person? Someone who is either over the age of 65 or under the age of 18, or someone who has a physical or mental disability, either temporary or permanent. They are also dependent on another person, or they are at greater risk than the general population of being harmed by someone who has authority over them. Police information checks, or PICs, are part of some organizational screening practices, and because they are often considered the safest method to screening, there can be societal pressures to use these types of checks in your screening process. However, they don't actually provide an accurate, clear, and concrete view of the individual. Because of this, these checks should never be used on their own. Consider using them with the rest of the 10 steps that we will address in Key 2. Keep in mind, the information within a police information check is private. You have a responsibility to your volunteer to keep their information safe. When considering using police information checks in your process, ask yourself, is a police information check actually necessary? What will I do with the information once I have it? How long will I keep it? And how long do I need it? You can see that there are numerous checks that can be done in both Alberta and Canada. However, in this key, we will be discussing police information checks and vulnerable sector checks only. When doing these checks, keep in mind that the information gathered is highly sensitive. You will need to plan how you will be effectively collecting and storing it. Think about your organization, the work your volunteer will do, and what kind of policies are in place. Do you think the position requires a police information check or a vulnerable sector check? You can find our risk assessment matrix in the sidebar. Use it for more guidance. If you still aren't sure, that's okay. We will look at the differences between PICs and VSCs to help deepen your understanding. Police information checks vary across Alberta and Canada, depending on jurisdictions and police detachment. The information you receive may range from traffic infractions with charges pending to convictions for crimes. These checks are typically a scan of local police records. This means that if the volunteer has not lived in your area for long, their information may not actually appear on the police information check. To get a comprehensive check, they may have to return to their previous community. So when do you get a police information check? If your volunteer is in a position of trust but not solely responsible for the well-being of vulnerable people. For example, someone who is a special event volunteer at a children's festival. They are part of a team and are not the sole person responsible for the children. It is important to have a full understanding of the risks associated with your organization, including if there is a risk to the volunteer, before identifying if a police information check is needed. Vulnerable sector checks can be completed in addition to police information checks. They scan local and national police databases and will reveal if the applicant is a pardoned sex offender. Remember, You will need to have a plan for how you store and collect this sensitive information. If your organization has volunteers solely responsible for the well-being of a vulnerable person, you should consider a VSC as part of your screening process. But remember, merely being in contact with a vulnerable person is not enough to warrant a vulnerable sector check. Start by thinking about whether or not your volunteer position will cause the volunteer to be in a position of trust and authority. Here is an example of a volunteer who would need a VSC. A person who is providing childcare, watching children on their own. They are the sole person responsible for the children's well-being, and they are in a position of trust and authority. Now you can consider your policies and procedures. These can help define the associated risks. By defining volunteer positions and policies, you can decide whether or not you need to include a VSC in your screening process. So, both types of checks are valid, but which check you require depends on your volunteer positions. Make sure that you understand the differences between the checks, and make sure you know what you will be using the information for. Also, if you have any questions about what type of check is needed, call your local police detachment. When you call, be prepared with your position descriptions, policies, and procedures. This will help expedite the process. It's important to find balance in the screening process. Part of the balance is understanding both the limitations and benefits to police information checks and vulnerable sector checks. First, limitations. Limitation 1. Cost. This can be a burden on your organization or volunteers. The cost to conduct a police information check is not standard across the province. They can range from free to $5 to $60 per check. Limitation number 2. Time. How long it takes to obtain a police information check. Are you putting volunteers in their roles before you receive the information from police services? Are you going to wait? How will this affect your volunteer engagement or your turnover rate? Limitation 3. Privacy. How do you store the information you receive? How do you interpret the information? How long will you keep the information you collect? How is the information disposed of? Limitation 4. Participation. We'll illustrate an example for this limitation. A person wishes to volunteer with your organization. They do have a record, a conviction for a DUI that happened when they turned 18. It has been several years since, and no other infractions are on their file. If you were using a PIC only, you may automatically turn this person away. Had you done an interview, however, you would be better able to determine whether the previous conviction was any cause for concern and explore whether the volunteer might still be a great match with your organization's values. Remember to always use the 10 steps to screening with a PIC. Limitation number 5, trust. Ideally, your volunteers should feel as though you and the organization trust their intentions. For example, if someone has volunteered for an organization for years and gets asked for a PIC, they may not feel trusted. Always explain the reason for why a PIC is important if a volunteer needs one. Remember, PICs are not just about the limitations, there are also benefits. First, we have protection. Ensuring your clients are safe from potential harm. Your organization must take steps to provide for duty of care. Second, risk and liability. Organizations are often expected to perform police information checks as part of risk mitigation and liability insurance. Are you fulfilling a requirement from your board or perhaps your insurance provider? Next, care and safety. Be diligent in putting the needs of your clients and all of those you serve first. Number 4, participation. Organizations may require people to have police information checks as part of their screening. As a volunteer manager, are you required to have volunteers undergo this type of screening? Depending on the types of clients you both work and engage with, you may have to conduct these types of screenings in order for people to volunteer with your client base. Fifth and final, trust. The more transparent your organization is about the screening processes, the more trustworthy you are. By having a robust screening process and by fulfilling your duty of care, you will attract insurance providers, board members, participating clients, and their families. Why? because you are taking care of clients and you care about their safety. In surveys and interviews conducted by Volunteer Alberta, organizations have expressed a 3-to-1 drop-off rate when volunteers are told they have to submit for a police information check as part of the screening process. So, if you need a PIC, make sure you understand and address the volunteers' concerns, which could include privacy, necessity, and time. Volunteers just want to give back. They don't necessarily understand the need for such a lengthy screening process, so make sure you explain the reasoning. Try to remember that it's important to see the opportunities when it comes to engaging volunteers, not just the limitations. And this is the end of key number 1. Thank you for watching. Be sure to watch key 2, as this is where we will walk you through the 10 steps to screening.